It needs to be a continuation of the decarbonization of the world. But it's, of course, a challenging triangle we're faced with. We have to also focus on energy security, access to energy, because there's a billion people not having access to electricity. And then it's the decoupling of growth in energy consumption and growth in CO2 emissions. So that triangle is like squaring that triangle.
Do you expect that differences on whether fossil fuels should be phased down or they should be phased out could be a stumbling block for everybody agreeing here in COP28? We're hearing now talk about the phase out of fossil fuel emissions, not necessarily fossil fuels per se. What's your view?
So this has been a topic for 20 years at the different COPs. I think what we have agreed in Paris is that we will have to go net zero by 2050, and there are different ways towards that. We're not on track currently. This year we're increasing the global CO2 emissions with 1.5%, and we should have been reducing them with 7%. So what we will need to do is to also use more technology to reach the target of 1.5, at least keep it alive. But there are some silver linings too. You know, the glass is either half empty or half full. If we met 10 years ago at the COP and I said that we would reduce the price of solar to 1/10, you probably would say I was pretty blue-eyed and naive. But today, solar is competitive most places in the world without any kind of subsidies. So the breakthroughs will be critical. For example, on carbon capture and storage, that is to your point about emissions or phasing out. If you can then capture and re-inject emissions as a bridge between a fossil fuel-based society and a renewable society, that can play a very important role together with nuclear, natural gas, and etc.
Let's talk about the global north and their commitment so far in terms of funding a just and equitable transition. I mean, even the Green Climate Fund, which started, you know, accumulating funds in 2014, never really reached the $100 billion a year. So is the global north falling behind on their commitments to the global south?
Let's see what happens now. I think the Emiratis also pledged a substantial amount of money today. So there is a gap between the Copenhagen commitment and 100 billion still. Maybe the gap is like 25, 30 billion at the most. And hopefully that gap will be closed now. So the Copenhagen moment happens in here in UAE in like 10, 15 years later. So that's too late, but it's better that it happens, that it doesn't happen. I think the agreement on the loss and damage fund was also incredibly important, agreed in Sharm el-Sheikh, but there was no money and there was no agreement on who was going to run the fund. No, it's the World Bank in the first years, and there's money in this, and countries will be eligible that are seeing the worst effects of climate change, developing countries, and most of them unfortunately are in the south.
You know, one important thing is that, do you think that really the global south at the moment is faced with a stark choice, which is either to go ahead with climate action or to choose between that or pursuing development? Are they really facing that choice at the moment?
It's coming back to the triangle I mentioned at the beginning. We have seen that energy security is incredibly important too. We've seen that in Europe last year. We also know that the hundreds of millions of people that don't even have access to electricity, there will be no development and no poverty eradication. So they will need to have access to energy. But many of these people are living in countries that have very, very low CO2 footprint today. Can we make sure that in the future we can have enough energy so we can eradicate poverty, and at the same time keep global growth going. I think then the big emitters of today will have to take a bigger responsibility. Some of them are also emerging countries though, or emerging economies. 1/3 of the global emissions come from the second largest country in the world, China, and the second biggest emitter is still the United States. So for these two countries it will be incredibly important. They can also decouple, continue their growth, but decouple this from growth in CO2 emissions.